Hi friends, and welcome to All By Myself. I'm Miss Rachel, and it's so nice to see you. Today's panel is Lost and Found, Family, Feelings, and Friendship. 6 incredible middle grade authors are here to talk to you today about their incredible books. Those authors are Joy McCullough, Karuna Riazi, Jake Burt, Janae Marks, Victoria Ying, and Shannon Doleski. If you're a Glenside patron, make sure you click the link in the description marked Glenside. That will take you to a page telling you all of the e-copies you're currently available to check out or put on hold. If you're more of a hard copy person, don't worry. You can fill out the form there and tell me exactly which books you would like to have on hold for you when the library is able to reopen. I hope you enjoy this panel. And welcome to our Lost and Found middle grade panel. I am so excited to talk to these wonderful panelists today about their amazing books. So I would like all of you to start with introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your book or books if you've got more than one. So alphabetical order for this first one, intro. So Jake, I think, will be first.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. My name is Jake Burt. I'm the author of Greetings from Witness Protection, The Right Hook of Devon Velma, The Tornado, and my upcoming novel this year is Cleo Porter and the Body Electric. That's the cover of it behind me there. If I move my head out of the way, you can see it a little bit better. And it is my first science fiction novel. It comes out this October. And if you can believe it, it is about a 12-year-old girl who lives in extreme social distancing quarantine as a result of a pandemic that hit her world 80 years before. In order to survive this pandemic, everybody had to move into hermetically sealed apartments. Cleo has never been outside of her apartment. It doesn't have windows. It doesn't even have a door. Everything she gets is delivered by drones, including medicine. And that's where the story starts. She gets a delivery of medicine that's meant for somebody else that doesn't live with her, and she has no way of getting it to this other person, even though this other person needs it to survive. And so that's the problem Cleo's dealing with in this science fiction novel.
Excellent. Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Doleski. I'm the author of Mary Underwater. It's an upper middle grade about a girl who is inspired by Joan of Arc to build and pilot a submarine across the Chesapeake Bay to get away from her abusive family. I only have one book.
You're good. Janae.
Hi, I'm Janae Marks. I'm the author of From the Desk of Zoe Washington, which you can see behind me. It just came out this year in January, and it tells the story of 12-year-old Zoe who dreams of becoming a professional baker, and her big dream is to get on the Kids Bake Challenge on the Food Network. And on her 12th birthday, she unexpectedly receives a letter from her father, who she's never met because he's been in prison her whole life. And in getting to know him through their back and forth letters, she ends up finding out that he might be innocent of the crime. So she decides to set out and discover the truth.
Excellent. Joy?
Hi, I'm Joy McCullough, and my middle grade debut is a field guide to getting lost. It's a contemporary story about Sutton and Louise, whose parents have just started dating each other. And they are both very indoorsy kids who end up getting forced to go on a hike and getting lost and having to work together to survive. It's not really a survival story, but
We love it.
Hi, I'm Karuna Riazi. I'm the author of The Gauntlet, which came out from Simon & Schuster Salam Reed's imprint in spring 2017. and its companion, The Battle, which came out last summer, 2019, and also an adaptation of The Jungle Book for Ghostwriter, the series from Sesame Workshop and Sourcebooks Wonderland. The Gauntlet is an inverse Jumanji-inspired fantasy with Middle Eastern and South Asian flair, starring 12-year-old Farah Mirza, who's a young Bangladeshi-American girl who has to move from Queens to Manhattan after her dad gets a new job. She has to leave her two best friends behind. And at her birthday party, they're reunited. Her mom throws this huge birthday party to introduce her to everybody at her school, force her to make friends. It doesn't really work. Her and her friends coop up in her room, and her really odd, eccentric aunt gives her this board game called The Gauntlet of Blood and Sand, and is like, I see you're kind of disconnected from your friends now that you moved. If you play this with them, maybe you'll reconnect. Instead of reconnecting in that type of way, the game comes to life and sucks in her little brother Ahmed, and so they pretty much have to go into the game to save him. So that's where the inverse Jumanji thing comes in. Instead of the game coming out, they go into the game. The battle has more of a sci-fi flavor, and it follows up with Ahmed several years later when he's a 12-year-old this time, and he and his new friend Winnie have to go up against the game in a different format, which is video games now instead of a board game, and they have to face down the game to not only save New York City, but the whole world as they know it.
So good. We love it. And Victoria.
Hi, my name is Victoria Ying. I'm an author and cartoonist. Currently, the book Diana, Princess of the Amazons, written by Shannon and Dean Hale, in stores now, and my forthcoming authored graphic novel, City of Secrets. City of Secrets is a steampunk fantasy about an orphan boy who is guarding a mysterious secret safe. He makes friends with this young adventurous girl, and one day when a group of assassins comes to kill him to silence him so he can't open the safe, they decide to open it and find out what is the secret inside their city.
Awesome. So some of you watching may be thinking to yourself, well, I feel like most of Rachel's panels so far have been like one or two genres of authors, and we kind of jump on this one from contemporary and fantasy and sci-fi, and we've got a graphic novel and all of this sort of stuff. But the thing that I love most about middle grade is that it hits at that age where it's so important for kids to have everything available to them, because they really are just starting to get that sort of wide variety of genre, really that first exposure. And so I wanted to sort of have a wide range of topics to talk about. But one of the things that's great about middle grade is, in addition, is that there's always these sort of common themes of finding yourself a little bit, family and friends, those connections that you're starting to really make with people. It's no longer just about necessarily who's right next to you. It's maybe even talking to somebody through letters, which isn't something you can necessarily do as a kindergartner because, kindergarten. So part of the title for this panel involves family and friendship. And so can you talk about the connections between characters that are the most significant in your book? Whether that's the family members, old friends, new friends, whatever it may be, whatever your favorite connection in the book is between characters.
Well, since you just mentioned letters, I can go first. So the most significant relationship in my book is that develops throughout the story is between Zoe and her father. And as you had mentioned, she's writing letters to him. So it's actually interesting. You don't actually get to see him in person throughout the majority of the book. And she doesn't even really get to speak with him outside of this format of letters. But the cool thing about the letters is that you're able to hear his voice sort of through the letters because she reads them. So that's kind of the most significant, I would say, relationship, because she never knew him before, and she's really getting a chance to get to know him and through their back and forth exchanges, and it's just a way for her to connect with him. There's a lot of relationships in the book, but that's definitely the one that stands out the most.
Well, in Field Guide, it's dual POV, and each character's relationship with the primary parent they live with is very important. But it was also really important to me to create other adults in both of their lives who are a part of their lives, who are supporting their single parent, and building relationships with the kids. Sutton in particular they live in an apartment building, and there's an upstairs neighbor lady who she goes to hang out with when her dad's in the symphony, and so when he's working nights and whatever, she hangs out with this older lady who is just one of my favorite characters maybe I've ever written. Like, I wish I could go hang out with her. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of populate their lives with other supportive adults that they could trust.
I can piggyback. Oh, go ahead, Shannon. All you.
Okay. So mine is, like I said, she is in an abusive family. So she's pretty closed off at the beginning of this book. She won't let anyone in. Her father has just come home from prison, and they are a working class family, and money depends on him. So it's good that he's there, but not good that he's there for different reasons. And it kind of throws everything off for her that he comes home. So she shuts down, she starts failing science. She doesn't tell her best friend because last time they called the social worker. And so her friend Kip is kind of like a golden retriever, and he gets partnered up with her on this science project, and he kind of gradually makes her come out of her shell, helps her come out of her shell. So through the book, she starts to have more friendships with other people, with adults, with kids. It's like that's her little arc there. So, yeah.
So in my book, City of Secrets, my main character, Ever Barnes, is a orphan boy who's kind of rejected relationships ever since his father died, because he wants to try to keep everyone from being possibly murdered. So the main character girl, Hannah, she actually is really pushy in terms of like wanting to be his friend, and she attempts over and over and over again to connect with him, and he's constantly rejecting her. And that relationship feels very close to a lot of my own experiences, both as being like the aloof friend and also being the person who wants to be friends with that aloof person, because you're like, they're cool and I will make them like me. So that's like the big relationship that's in the story. But there's also a big theme where family as almost a mythology is really important, because Ever Barnes is hiding his family secret, and it turns out throughout the story you learn that there are different families throughout the city that are harboring their own small family secrets in order to protect everybody and hide this giant mythological secret.
So in Cleo Porter and the Body Electric, her most important relationship, you'd think it would be with her parents, because those are the only two people she's ever actually met in her life. But both of her parents work very long hours. Her mother is a drone surgeon. That is, she pilots the drone that goes to other people's apartments to perform surgery on them, because doctors can't actually be in the same room as their patients. Actually, that's what Cleo is in training to do as well. And her father programs for their simulator. So Cleo's most important relationship is with her virtual teacher. Her name is Miss Vane. Vane is in all capital letters, Virtual Adaptive Instructional Network. And so Cleo dialogues with a teacher on her, basically on her tablet, on her device. It's called a scroll, because she can actually furl it up like a scroll and then snap it open, and it works the same way an iPad would. And that virtual teacher is not only her instructor, but is also her emotional scaffold. It's who she bounces ideas off of. And so that's by far her most important relationship, until a little bit later on in the adventure when she picks up a little friendly drone and so on and so forth.
Okay, so I wrote out my notes in advance so I wouldn't ramble. But I think that both the battle and the gauntlet have this really heavy-handed, in a good way, focus on friendship in particular. But I think both of them also really just focus on the importance of having people you love and trust around you. And there's a nice blend in both of them of having those people be both friends and family. Neither of these stories would be what they are if you took away the core aspect of connecting with your family and your found family and your friends, and loving each other's strengths and being able to rely on each other and not just feel like you can go on your own. The gauntlet focuses more on old friends and reestablishing, like, old patterns. Like, Farah has been best friends with Essie and Alex for most of her life. So they know each other really well. But in the battle, it's kind of more of a focus on new friends. Ahmed starts out the book feeling like he's the type of kid who, unlike Farah, is very weird and introspective. He feels like he's kind of misunderstood. The adults in his life, apart from his parents, often find him kind of as a troublemaker. You know, like he doesn't think before he speaks. He's constantly in trouble at school. He admires Winnie from afar because he knows they like the same things. He just loves the fact that she's a total nerd like him. And I love that that's part of his need in the story. He wants to have a good friend in his corner, the way Farah has always had it kind of there for her and has modeled to him that that is something that you need in your life. And that's something that as a middle schooler, I always just like really wanted to be surrounded by good friends, and have those inside jokes, and you know, like have someone who knows where I'm coming from and knows, like, you know, what my strengths are when I don't understand what those strengths are. And I like the fact that that's going to get fulfilled at the end of the book just as much as the overarching conflict of having to save New York City and the rest of the world as you know it is just as important in this book, to be able to, like, you know, find this connection with Winnie, who it turns out he doesn't know always wanted to be his friend as well. So he was always like kind of building up in his head that she's too cool, I would never be able to connect with her, and she's over there thinking, you know, he's really cool and it would be really nice to be friends with him. So I really thought that was crucial to, like, you know, show that kind of experience and make that, you know, really important and make it kind of feel like a triumph at the end that Ahmed has this friend and he and Winnie were able to connect. And, like, you know, I really love that about it.
I feel like I need to call my friends now. So, and speaking of tearing up, the other F in the title is feelings. So that was intentionally a segue. Sure. So can you talk a little bit about the emotional journeys your characters are going on? Janet, I know you already touched on this, so I'm going to add a part 2, which is why do you think it is important in middle grade to show not just positive emotions, but everything, positive, negative, everything in between?
Well, I kind of had to. There's, you know, she goes through so much in this that really I had to work on, like, balancing all the heavy stuff with the lighter stuff. So my villain is the dad, and he takes place completely off screen, and he's kind of like the shark in Jaws. Like, we don't see him until the end of the book. And I just kind of focused on what her feelings are after things happen instead of, like, in the moment, because for kids who are victims of abuse, it's the after that really matters. So yeah, I think it's important to explore those feelings instead of kind of sensationalizing the trauma of everything. So the act of violence isn't in there, but the feelings afterwards are. But I have a sweet little love story in there too, so that does help kind of weigh those things out for my book.
Okay, so in my book, both of the characters are dealing with a sort of isolation. Luis, in that he's allergic to a whole bunch of things, and so there's a lot of reasons why he has to be careful about, he's allergic to bees, and he's allergic to dogs, and he's allergic to all sorts of things. So, and his mom is kind of overprotective, partly because her husband died a number of years ago, and so she's protective of him, and so he's dealing with that isolation, and he's reaching an age where he loves his mom and has a great relationship with her, but he wants to be able to get out and have more relationships with other people, and he's lonely, really, and he's frustrated with not being able to do more. And then Sutton's mom is in Antarctica as a research scientist. And when the book starts, she's just found out that her mom won't make it home for her 10th birthday. And so Sutton is going through a whole lot of feelings about her mom. Sutton is also a scientist. And so she really admires her mom's work. But also she's feeling like the penguins are more important than she is. And just really longing for that connection. So they're both sort of, it's all about wanting connection, but in different ways. Sutton's really quite introverted. Her dad's always trying to get her to go out and make more friends. And she's like, I don't need more friends. I'm good. She just wants her mom. So it's a loneliness thing, which I think is a thing that all kids and adults can relate to in different ways.
So I would say that Zoe's big emotional journey sort of revolves around the mystery of the story, which is whether or not her father, who's in prison, is truly innocent of the crime or not, because and it partially also goes back to her desire to have this relationship with him. And what we learn in the beginning of the book is that her mother, the reason why she hasn't met him before, or this is the first time she's written back to him or received a letter from him, is because her mom basically kept her from him. She got remarried when she was young, and sort of felt like she didn't think it was the best idea to have a child, having a relationship with somebody who potentially was in prison, who was in prison for something pretty bad. So I think her emotional journey is, in the very beginning, sort of the shock of, hearing from this person, then the feelings of, oh my gosh, I'm finally getting a chance to kind of fill this hole that's been inside of not knowing my dad. And then when she finds out that he might be innocent, this feeling of, is he really innocent? Is he lying to me? Is there a way that I can find this out? So there's a lot of, it's a big roller coaster, I would say, even until the end, when it's kind of like, the question is, will she find out the truth? Whether or not she finds out the truth, will her mom accept, her have a relationship with him? So yeah, there's a lot of, it's very much a roller coaster for sure. And I think, going back to your other question, it's important to show the good and the bad, the sad and the happy, because I think that's what kids are going through. I mean, whether they relate to this particular story of having a parent in prison or not, there are so many ups and downs and questions and confusions in kids' lives that I think it makes sense for it to be included in books so they can explore those feelings in a safe way. So.
In Cleo, the main emotion that my character sort of espouses throughout the entire book is her sense of compassion. And the reason why I wrote it this way, I wanted to explore a character who was driven primarily by her compassion. There was a lot of stuff in the news as I started writing this book, as I was first planning it out, that seemed to me to be motivated by either an absence of or an intentional lack of compassion, just internationally. And it made me wonder, what if I had a character, what if I had a kid who based all of her decisions on her care for other people? What kinds of positives would come from that, and what kind of trouble would she get in if she always put the emotional and physical well-being of other people first? And then I put her in a nearly impossible world to be that kind of person in, so that it would challenge her every step of the way. How do you care for other people when you are locked in an apartment away from other people? How do you be a caregiver in that situation? And it was a whole lot of fun, and also a pretty emotional journey for me as her author, to explore, okay, how do I let Cleo be this compassionate person she wants to be?
I think Ahmed's emotional journey reflects and revolves a lot of the issue of self-worth, which is something that I have struggled with as a middle schooler and in general, and still struggle with. Just knowing that you're a worthy person just the way you are, as weird as you might feel, as so socially awkward as you might feel you are, there are people out there who will get you and connect with you and affirm with you, like, the qualities that you might often ignore about yourself when you're only getting reinforcement for what seems to be negative. I think it kind of came out that way, mainly because of the environment I was in at the time. I was in my first year of teaching, just finished undergrad, was a homeroom teacher for a bunch of really lovely 7th graders who are now my 9th graders. And, I was with them a lot. A lot of my kids, who are really, really wonderful people, were struggling with feeling like, that weird age where you feel dorky, where you feel like you're either into stuff that the rest of the class isn't into, or when you're into it, it feels like everybody's moved on. Like, there were a lot of different issues going on. Meanwhile, I was in that, first year teacher, like, situation where I felt like either I was doing a lot and it wasn't being appreciated, or I wasn't doing enough compared to, like, what somebody else on staff was doing. So I was kind of like in the same situation. And as I would give them pep talks, I would just be like, oh, this is what I'm feeling today too. I am also feeling like I'm kind of weird, or I'm like blurting out something during staff meeting and everybody's looking at me just like, what kind of joke was that? And it's just like, oh, I maybe I'm not connecting with people the right way. So like Ahmed is like, he's a wonderful son. He's a loving sibling. He looks up to Farah a lot. He's a talented artist. He has a good memory. He's good at puzzles and riddles. But at the beginning of the story, he doesn't see that. He kind of has like, internalized what his teachers often see about him, which is that kid who just opens his mouth and just snarks. And I had one of my boys in my class who just used to do that. And I used to just be like, can you not? I tried to level with him. He would say something. I'd just be like, so kind of writing this too helped me understand him, because when I was writing Ahmed, a lot of it was just like, okay, so maybe sometimes I'm this teacher and I'm not Ahmed the way I think I am. So it's like, he doesn't see it, and he has to work towards a place where he feels like he's contributing and where what he has within him matters. And I really thought that that was important to put out as well. Like, that I know sometimes in middle grade, I personally like to find the stories where it's like middle grade was such a happy experience. And it's just like, okay, but sometimes there are days where you're like the dork who blurts out a joke and everybody looks at you and they don't get it. And so I think that was what ended up being his emotional journey, just trying to figure out how to be comfortable with who you are and find someone who's also like, you know what, this is how you are and it's okay. This is actually a great thing. This is a great person that you've become, like, it's fine.
So in my story, City of Secrets, the characters Ever Barnes and Hannah, they actually both are kind of like two sides of the same coin, in the sense that their issue is kind of how they view adventure. For Ever, because he saw his father get murdered and he's being chased around by assassins, he knows that this is like a very dangerous world to live in. Whereas Hannah, she kind of comes at it with this very naive kind of like, let's have fun. And she wants to engage and she wants to be part of this, until she kind of really sees that what the danger is in it. So the two of them together kind of find a middle ground, like what it is to take things seriously, but at the same time also take those risks in friendship and adventure and all those things in order to do the right thing.
Nice. So we're all grown-ups, mostly. And one of the things I'm always curious about as a grown-up, oh, there goes the dog. I think he's far. Nope.
Maybe it's a delivery.
I'm gonna start this whole thought over. They'll stop him eventually, I think. Okay, so one of the things I'm always curious about is how you guys, as middle grade authors who are adults, get into the mindset of these young characters, because I think you all do it super well and have really good like voices in terms of your characters seem very authentic and very like they very much seem the age that they are. And so I'm wondering if you have any sort of like pre-writing rituals that sort of get you into that like that mood, if you got like music that you have to listen to before you start writing, or if you like have to go back and read what you wrote the day before a little bit so you get that voice back in your head. Like what's that like for you? What's that process like?
I can take that one. I cheat. I spend about 8 hours a day with 10 and 11-year-olds for my day job. So it's pretty easy for me to slip in once I'm writing to that voice, because I hear it all day and I observe them. They don't even realize I'm watching them sometimes, but all the weird little wonderful things that 10 and 11-year-olds do throughout the day when the teacher becomes just piece of the furniture. So they don't realize I'm watching them, and they're being their bizarre little selves. And I observe, I take notes, and then I bring them home and I shove that stuff in my books.
Yeah, same. I live with middle grade readers, middle grade age characters. So, and any background noise you're hearing right now is my son yelling at his Minecraft right up above me. So yeah, I'm not a teacher, so I don't have like 30 of them. But I do have my kids that are just like always there. They're always input. They're the ritual and the soundtrack that I listen to have middle grade voice. I don't know, maybe I'll have to come up with something different when they're older, but for now I'm just kind of steeped in it.
So I wrote The Gauntlet when I was in undergrad, and fun fact, I first wanted it to be a YA when I was approached to write it, because I thought I love middle grade, but I thought I would not be able to do it justice because I didn't have any more middle grade age people in the house. My brother was in high school and now he's in college, so now we really don't have anybody in that age range in the house anymore. So I actually looked at my younger cousins a lot. They actually got thanked in the acknowledgments of the Gauntlet because I used to just look at them and just be like, what are you guys up to? And what do you like? And try to use like, you know, their enthusiasm as 12-year-old girls to tap into my memories of what I loved as a 12-year-old girl. So I also spent a lot of time rewatching Jumanji, seeing what I felt during games of Monopoly with my siblings and cousins, mostly frustration and rage. But I guess that was helpful to relive those sort of memories as well. When I wrote The Battle, I was luckier, and like Jake, I became immersed in middle grade culture by being a teacher and like, just being around my kids all day, every day. Like they would bring me into their stuff. I didn't actually even have to like work my way in. Some days I'd just be like, being one of the youngest teachers on staff, she's like, do you want to see what we're doing? Or knowing what video games were, the boys would come and they would like bring their Switches and I would be like, oh yeah, I'm saving up for a Switch. Oh really? Like you should get this, you should get that. This is what we're into. This is what you shouldn't try. Like, whenever I need to get in touch once again with what's going on, like the kids are usually good. And now that they know that they'll get thanked in books, like it's just like, oh yeah, you have research questions? Come and sit here. Like, let's talk about it. What do you want to know? And one of the biggest gifts that I actually got from teaching, especially my first year, 7th grade homeroom, the kids actually attempted to make a play out of the Gauntlet, and it never happened the way we wanted. And they did not know at the time that a sequel had been agreed upon with the publisher. But being able to watch them, we actually had auditions, and I think one of my girls still has the tape somewhere. She recorded it with her camera, and she was like very professional about it. And I think she's going to be a film major one day. I'm pretty sure. I keep encouraging her. But she wrote a script. We had auditions in class one day, and being able to see what they related to and what they felt also really helped me when I went home and I had to work on The Battle. I would kind of have that sort of, it was kind of a ritual in a way, even though they didn't know that they were helping me at the time.
Man, I'm so jealous of you guys. Like, I'm a childless 30-something, and I haven't had much interaction with kids in this age range in a long time, but, I really had to kind of tap into my own experience and my own memories of being middle grade, which is a little difficult for me, but at the same time, because it's a fantasy, I was able to get away with more, I think. Like I didn't have to worry too much about like what's referential, what's cool, like what the slang is. So, really what I tapped into was mostly like the feelings and friendship. Like I know that's the big theme of this panel, but really wanting to be friends with people and having that relationship feel so automatic and so natural is something that you really lose once you're no longer that age. Like, when you're that age where you can be like, do you want to be my friend? And they'll be like, yeah, okay. And like that was something that I miss as an adult now, trying to make friends. And so that was the real feeling I was trying to tap into and try to get that authentic middle grade voice. But yeah, I don't know, I'm so jealous that you guys get to have this like resource just right at your fingertips.
I'm like Victoria. I also don't have children at that age at my fingertips. I have a 4-year-old, but I did similar things. I kind of tapped into my inner middle school aged self. I definitely have a lot of memories and nostalgia from that time. And also, like Karuna, I actually set out to write this book as a YA at first. And then early on in the process, when a critique partner read it, they said, oh, I think this actually sounds more middle grade. And it was more about, I think, the story and the plot and everything. But actually, like I kind of looked back, and every other book that I'd written was always kind of on the younger end of YA. Like it was never edgy. It was always very light. So in terms of, I don't know, language and subject, it would never went too heavy like some of the YA can get to be. So I kind of feel like now that I've written this one, I feel like maybe I was always kind of meant to be in middle grade. But yeah, another thing that I did to kind of help myself get into the heads of kids is, one of the things I did for research for this book, because Zoe is a baker, is I watched a lot of Kids Baking Championship on the Food Network. And so it was great because you get to watch the kids, like they're all this age range, 8 to 11, 8 to 12. And they're competing with each other, but they're obviously having conversations and, and they talk to the camera a lot. So I kind of would watch and take notes about the baking, but also take notes about the kind of ways that they interact with each other. And one nice thing about like these baking shows with kids is they're so much nicer to each other than adults are. Like it's like they're competitive, but they're like also willing to stop and help the next person if they need to. I don't know. It was just so heartwarming to watch those shows, and kind of, again, reminded me why I love writing for this age group.
So mine is kind of similar, where I originally wrote Mary Underwater as a YA, mostly because I was an 8th and 9th grade teacher, and 9th grade doesn't really exist in either YA or middle grade. And so I kind of think that that's why it took me so long to get it published, was that I'm kind of in this no man's land. So Mary's in 8th grade, and I used to teach it. My husband is a social worker, and he used to work for Child Protective Services, and then he joined the military as a social worker. And so once that happened, we started moving all over the country, and I stopped teaching and I stay home. We have a billion children. And I started staying home with them. And I think I really missed my 9th graders. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna try this. I know 9th grade isn't a popular age for YA, but I'm gonna write it anyway. And even when I got my agent, we like knew, okay, 14 is like, doesn't exist. So you might have to make this middle grade. I was like, yeah, that's fine. I was fine with it. Her voice sounds very middle grade. And I also worked with the kids, but I also kind of feel like I don't feel like I'm 39. I feel like I'm a child, like my whole life, and not in like I don't adult or something, but I just feel very like joyful and full of so many emotions. And like, I feel really happy or really angry, like a 14-year-old. So I think that's why I like writing for this age group.
As someone who has watched all of your TikToks can confirm.
Yeah, I'm a child.
Yeah, it's it. I really felt that teacher as furniture thing in my soul that Jake said, because like I'm not a teacher, I'm a librarian, but like they get into a groove and then they do not notice you until you're like behind them saying, hey, can you guys be quiet? And they're like, oh, hello, where'd you come from?
They even do it in distance lessons. Like I'm teaching my kids every day live synchronous lessons via Google Meet, and my kids don't realize that I'm staring right at their faces. So last week I had a kid just start eating a waffle, just with his hands, eating a waffle and vocalizing his pleasure at eating this waffle. And everybody could hear him as he went, anam, 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 like actually saying the word anam, anam, anam as he ate a waffle. And then the chat comes in, mute, you got to put mute. I won't say his name on the thing, but everybody's yelling at him to mute. And then finally I had to say, hey, waffle sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And then he got embarrassed, and not only did he mute himself, but he turned his camera off too. And I assume he finished his waffle. But
it must have been a great waffle. That's what
it made me hungry for waffles.
I want a waffle now.
I wish I could take that much joy in a waffle.
Yeah, honestly. So one of the things I'm always interested in, what came first to you, your characters or the storyline? Like, did you hear their voice in your head? Did you sort of get the idea for what the plot would be? And extra little piece for Victoria, because you've got the art piece of it as well. Like, did you see it in your brain first, or did you hear it? Like, did you hear their voices, or did you like see what would become your poems?
So this is like the first actual long form story that I wrote. I wrote it originally as a prose novel during NaNoWriMo. And the story came about because I don't actually dream as myself most of the time. Like I only dream with myself in the actual dream maybe like half of the time. So I had, and apparently this is not that uncommon. I asked Twitter and I had a poll and like 50% of the people who answered said they have the same thing. Like it's like watching a movie with different people in it. So I had this little snippet from my dream of like two kids trying to open a safe in a giant moving building with an assassin chasing them. And that was kind of it. And then I was like, okay, well, who are they? What happened? Why are they running from this assassin? Why is this person trying to kill them? So I just had this like one climactic moment. And in my dream originally, I think that Hannah, like they were more closer to the age of me and my brother. So Hannah was a little older and Ever was kind of the age he is. And so I took that moment and I tried to extrapolate, like almost like work backwards from that to be like, okay, how did they get in this situation? Who are they? What is this world that they're living in? So when I wrote it as a prose novel, also because I knew it was a giant moving city, like a steampunk city, and I was like, I don't want to draw that. It's like, it's going to be so much work. And so I was like, I'll just like hand wave it away with description. But then in the end, like it really was more suited as a graphic novel than a prose novel. So that's pretty much like how that story came about.
Okay. So, well, with Field Guide, it's the only book I've ever written that I can pinpoint the exact moment of inspiration. Usually it's like a slower coming together of things. But my father was visiting. I live in the Seattle area, and we were out on an island, and we were at a park, and I don't do outside. So it wasn't like a heavy duty like hike or something, but we were just in a park and we got lost. We couldn't find the parking lot. And he made a comment about Lewis and Clark could get lost in a park. I had no idea like why that came into his head, but it did. And I just immediately was like, picture book. And then I tried, and picture books are hard, and I couldn't write it. But I started to think of these two characters, and at first I was calling them Louise and Clark. I called the girl Clark, and we ended up changing that because I didn't want to get into westward expansion and all that. But I started then developing them further, and I wrote it as a chapter book, and eventually it became middle grade. But it was very much like, okay, there's these two kids that are lost in a park. That's the story. So very much like character and plot at the same time, which is unusual, but the way it worked out this time.
So both the Gauntlet and the Battle were collaboratively developed due to my working with book packager Cake Literary. So the story bones were like kind of already laid out like loosely. A great deal did get changed when I came on, because originally it was like, we want a Muslim like fantasy adventure, and then like, a lot came from back and forth discussion. But a great deal of time on my end during the initial stages did go into developing character and voice, and trying my best to connect and see what kind of kids Farah and Ahmed would need to be in order to take on this world filled with dangerous puzzles and this evil architect guy that they're trying to defeat. So especially with the Battle, I would say the first thing I tried to do was like try to think about character. It was the first time I ever wrote a boy protagonist in my life, and I was really like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do this right? So I did spend a lot of time like hovering over my boys in class and just like saying, okay, what you said was not polite, but how could I reword that? It's always an adventure with the boys in my class, honestly, but really it was like kind of helpful to have them right there when I was thinking about voice, when I was thinking about like, attitude and behavior and concerns. So yeah, I would say that it definitely ended up being kind of a character first thing.
I can go. I came up with the idea first and then the character second. So there is a John Mayer song called Walt Grace's Submarine Test, January 1967. And it's about a guy who makes his own submarine and takes it across the Pacific Ocean, I believe. And I thought, why can't a girl do that? And which is like my usual thought with most guy stories. And yeah, so I did that. And then my favorite, so when I was a teacher, I always had these boy students who were class clowns who were always like in love with the quiet, serious girl. And they were like in these long relationships that I found really interesting. And that's what Kip and Mary are. She's like serious and kind of grumpy, and he's like really outgoing and the class clown and kind of annoying. So I went from that to that.
My story started off with the concept of people trapped in a building as a result of needing to avoid each other to avoid a pandemic. And then once I had that concept in place, I asked myself, what type of kid would this just drive nuts? What type of kid would have to break out of this and would have to get out and go on an adventure? And that's where the idea of Cleo came from. Just this kid who would see somebody else suffering or know that somebody else was suffering and not be able to leave it alone. And so the concept came first in Cleo Porter and the Body Electric, and then Cleo naturally evolved from that.
I also came up with the idea first and then the character. The point of inspiration for me was in writing about like a middle grade that features a kid with a parent in prison and then a possible wrongful conviction. And my inspiration was from back in 2014, listening to the podcast Serial, the first season of it, which basically told that kind of story. And I kept in it. And since, you know, I write for a younger age group, as I was listening to that and just sort of starting to think of ideas, I started to wonder what would it be like to have a parent be in that situation. So yeah, and then afterwards, similar to Jake, you know, once you come up with the idea, you have to kind of think about what would be the best character for this situation, what kind of attributes should they have that would make them the best person to go along this journey. And that's also kind of why I decided to take the advice to turn it to middle grade, because with YA, I realized that Zoe would probably have a lot more knowledge about, you know, the injustices in the world and not be quite as naive. I mean, there's some, you know, I think there are definitely teens who don't know everything, but I just feel like they're a little bit more exposed. While her being 12, I think it was easier for me to kind of put her in a place of having very little knowledge. She's very surprised by the idea that people could go to prison who don't deserve it. And so I feel like her arc, her journey made a lot more sense once I lowered her age. So I think that was also a big part of how I came up with her character.
Okay, so we're basically out of time, so I'm going to do one last question, but everyone's answers need to be on the short side. What is your very favorite thing about writing for this age group?
I would say my favorite part of writing middle grade stories is remembering which stories were really formative for me and helped me figure out the type of person I wanted to be, which was thanks to all the brilliant women fantasy authors I read, very opinionated, profoundly feminist, and constantly determined to protect those I love. And so when I read these stories and look back on them, I hope that my stories in turn will support kids at times they need the escape the most, the recognition of who they are the most, and the love for them and their backgrounds the most. And maybe one day those will be the titles they look back at and think in their interviews when they get published. So it's kind of like I always think about the kids and what they're getting out of it, and that's what I enjoy the most.
Yeah, I think my answer is similar. Like, I love middle grade stories that are true power fantasies, because that is the age in which you are discovering your power, your individuality, the person that you're going to be. And so, like, I love writing for this age because it's all potential and none of that. Like, I love YA, but YA has like so many more questions and, like, you know, kind of trying to fit into the world. And like for middle grade, we kind of get to do the base, well, for me anyways, I did like a very basic, like, good versus evil story. And I love that, telling that kind of story.
I write middle grade because middle graders are my favorite people in the world. They're my career. My daughter's 13 years old. So middle graders are pretty much my life, and writing books about them is sort of a way to do them justice, to spend a little bit more time in their world and to walk in their shoes in a way that I haven't been able to do for the last 30 years of my life. I guess I miss it that much that I'm willing to, you know, dive into the literature for it to reclaim some of what makes 10 and 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds so bloody brilliant.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I also would add that I love how hopeful middle grade can be. I think, you know, kids lit in general can be pretty hopeful, but I think in particular middle grade, there's just, it does have a much more like, it's heartwarming, it's emotional, I don't know, it's very heartfelt, so I also appreciate that about it.
So I disappeared there for a minute. Zoom quit on me, but I'm back. But I gather we're on to why we write middle grade. And probably the things that I would say are probably similar to what everyone has been saying, but definitely the hopeful element of middle grade. I just love that so much. I also love that the books that, like, when you ask people what books changed their lives, what books they're really passionate about, so often it's books they read when they were 10, 11, 12. Like, it's those middle grade readers. They love books like nobody else. You know, they just engage and invest so much in their books. And so, I mean, who wouldn't want to write for that kind of reader? And yeah, I just think middle grade kids are awesome. And so I love getting to have anything to do with them.
Yeah, I love teaching 8th and 9th graders, and I think being 13 and 14, there's such a huge change that takes place over that year. And I loved watching them grow in that time, and I just want to reflect that in my books.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for tuning into this panel. If you're looking for more panels like it, make sure you check out the All by My Shelf playlist on our YouTube page. It'll tell you all of the different panels that you're able to watch.